Hello, I'm Dr. Craig Childress. I'm a clinical psychologist in Pasadena, California, specialized in working with children and families around issues of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, parent-child relationship problems, angry oppositional defiant children, marital problems, things like that. And in this video series, I've been discussing a particular type of parent-child relationship issue that I refer to as a parental alienation dynamic. And in this set of video segments, I'm discussing the origins of the parental alienation dynamic in a process called the transgenerational transmission of trauma. That is a conceptual framework derived out of early childhood mental health that describes the processes by which early childhood relationship patterns are transferred into future relationship patterns. Now, in the previous video segments, I talked about the beta child alpha parent relationship that initially was traumatizing to the beta child, how the beta child did not modify those relationship networks through experience, and so brought them essentially intact into the current relationship situation, and how those are reactivated again when the delta parent expresses psychological separateness from the beta parent. Okay? And so now the beta parent, because of the psychological separateness, re-experiences all that trauma anxiety from the early childhood because we build what we use. And so the psychological separateness is associated with this intense anxiety, and those neural networks have been established through use-dependent processes in early childhood and have not been modified in other relationships throughout the course of development. So therefore they remain as intense as they were in that early childhood trauma experience. And so now when they're reactivated, the beta parent feels this intense anxiety associated with the delta parent, that they are somehow dangerous, and they then attribute meaning to that experience of anxiety and say it must be because the delta parent is abusive. Now, in addition, because we have this reactivated network out of early childhood, we get these reactivated networks regarding relationship patterns. So we get the theme of abusive parent, victimized child. That's the theme out of that early childhood relationship pattern of the abusive alpha parent, victimized beta child. And so now we have the same theme over here of abusive targeted parent, victimized delta child. Okay. So the moment we reactivate this dynamic and define the delta parent as somehow abusive, there's an overlay between the relationship networks for the alpha parent and the targeted parent. The alpha parent produces the anxiety, the delta parent produces the anxiety. They become an overlaid representational networks. Okay? So they become almost fused. Remember, psychological fusion is the way of being of the delta parent. So within this kind of mixed world of trauma, the alpha parent becomes the delta parent becomes the alpha parent. Now, in addition, the beta child becomes the delta child, the victimized child. And so if the delta parent is an abusive parent, then there must be a victimized child. That becomes the delta child. And so it becomes exceedingly important to the beta parent that the child be constructed as a victimized child, because that's part of this whole reenactment, this whole reactivation of those early childhood trauma networks. And in this early childhood trauma, just to flesh out all the characters of the play, the beta parent becomes that split-off representational network for the all-good parent, and the all-bad parent is the delta parent. Okay. Now we have all of our cast of characters in play, and now we're reactivating and reanimating this early childhood relationship schema, this early childhood relationship pattern in the current situation. And going back to the diagnoses that I discussed in other videos, It is this reactivation of early childhood relationship patterns in the current situation, this trauma network that is reactivating and redefining current relationships that are not actually authentic. The Delta parent is not abusive. This is not actual. This is not in relation to anything authentic or real occurring in the situation. That is the delusional disorder. Now, the tip of the iceberg of the delusional disorder is that the Delta parent is somehow abusive. That's where you can see it most clearly. But in full measure, the delusion is the reactivation of a relationship pattern out of early childhood and its imposition on current relationship patterns in the current situation, including the child as the victim. The child's not a victim. But the child, within this reenactment narrative, the child must be a victim. And so what the beta parent does is it creates the child as the victim, and because the child and parent are in this fused psychological state, the child is incorporating the psychological structure of the beta parent and the meaning construction of the beta parent. And so I described that elsewhere about how the child absorbs the meaning structure of the beta parent. And so the child then expresses their role within this reenactment scenario from early childhood. Now that's problematic for the child. The Delta child has a right to their own authentic life experience. And what's occurring in this process is that the Delta child is losing their authentic life in order to play a role in the reenactment of the trauma associated with the beta parent. So in this reenactment of the early childhood trauma of the beta parent's psychological abuse, the child is losing their authentic childhood. They are now the victimized child. But the problem here within this whole alienation or the whole reenactment narrative is that the targeted parent, the Delta parent, is not abusive. They're just psychologically separate. They're just a separate person. They didn't do anything. Psychological separateness is danger, activated all the anxiety networks. Okay? But they didn't really do anything. So they are not abusive. So that victimized child isn't really a victimized child. And that's where you can begin to unravel the whole transgenerational trauma kind of process. If you look at that behavioral sequences, you will see that the child is not the victim of abuse. The child is the perpetrator of abuse. The child has to perpetrate the abuse and the rejection and then quickly flip to define themselves as the victim. Okay? That's imperative to this reenactment scenario because the child rejecting and being hostile and negative and rejecting and abandoning the Delta parent defines the Delta parent as abusive, okay, and justifies the meaning construction of the beta parent as that the Delta parent is abusive and this is a victimized child, because why else would the child be so hostile or aggressive towards them and rejecting? They must be doing something abusive. But the essential feature of all this relationship dynamic is that the child be defined as the victim. So when you go back with this behavioral sequence to the beta parent and say, no, the child is not the victim of abuse. The Delta parent's not doing anything wrong at all. The child is actually mean, hostile, aggressive. The child is actually the perpetrator of the abuse. The beta parent will be unable to integrate that information. They will look at you with a blank face. They will say, well, no, it's the way they said it. It's something about the style, the communication, because they will be unable to integrate that information because it is essential to this management of anxiety, this trauma network that has been reactivated, that this scenario play out of the victimized child and the abusive parent. And so they will be unable to incorporate that the child is not a victim. And I'll describe this a little bit more in the next video segment.